Okay, so what we're going to do today is we're going to do some more motion tracking, and I've already turned my footage into a sequence, and so I've got two shots here, and let's open them up. And the first thing that we need to do is we need to look here, and we can see that the frame rate is 30 frames a second. And we don't want that. So what we're going to do is we're going to right click and we're going to interpret the footage and turn it to 25 frames a second. Take this one and interpret it at 25 frames a second, because it was all shot in 25 frames a second, and we're going to export it in 25 frames a second. So we need to keep that consistent. So now we've got it in a 25 frames per second sequence, and I'll just set the camera tracker going. And the shot itself is 25 frames a second. If we put a 25 frames a second shot into a 30 frames per second sequence, the tracking will be off. It won't work because the frames won't match up, and that will make the track slip around a little bit on the footage. So this ensures that everything that we track is absolutely accurate, and when we get on to doing 3D integration, like using 3D software to put in objects, that becomes absolutely vital to make sure that our track is rock solid. So now this has done the track, and so I'm going to kind of go through, because what I really want is I want a nice flat area. And I could choose these would be okay, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through, because I want that table. I think the table is going to have enough track points for me to create like a decent track. So I'm going to press shift and select what. So these are all tracked on the table, and then I'm going to create a solid and a camera. And the reason why we're creating a solid this time is because what we're going to do is we're going to try, using rotational tools, is to get this kind of lined up with a table. And then what I kind of tend to do is I tend to use something called a grid, and drop that onto the solid, and then you can judge whether or not this is accurate. So when we slide through, we can see that that is now locked onto the table, and so now we know that we've got a great frame of reference, and that whatever we do, we'll be able to put things on the table. The other thing is that when we look at this, we can see that the table is kind of down there, and then we've got the camera up here, and actually if we look at this from the front, we can see that, you know, it's a pretty crazy setup we've got going on here, because it's put the camera up here, and that should really be, you know, completely flat, and that's going to create some problems a little bit later, and I'll show you how to sort that one out when we kind of need to. But for this project, I think that we're probably going to be okay for that. So now what we're going to do is now we've got a frame of reference, we can start to bring in our elements that we want to kind of make 3D. So what I'm going to do is I want to put like a bunch of Polaroids floating around in the kind of air, and I'll show you why we want to do that a little bit later. So we're going to drag the frame into a composition. And this frame I got, I thought it was a PNG cutout, but it is not. So I'm going to have to do a little bit of masking to create the frame. So I'm going to cut out the frame itself. So I've created one mask that goes around it, and then I'm going to create a mask for the interior. And then the interior mask is going to subtract. So then I've got a cutout of the Polaroid frame. And then I've got a picture of Chris Evans, which I found on the internet when I was looking for a photo of a person, and he was the one who came up. And so I'm going to stick his photo in the background, and that kind of artwork is now done. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring in this frame, which I'm going to rename. I'm going to call it Photo 1. And if I call it Photo 1, every time I create a duplicate of that, it will create the next one will be called Photo 2, etc. And then this, I'm just going to call assets, and this is where I'm going to put all of my material, everything that's based, all of the things that I need for this project are all going to be kept in there because it just keeps things a little bit tidier. And then I'll get on to shot 2 in a minute, but actually I might start tracking that now and let it work in the background. So we've got our shot 2, and this is great. We've got a perfect track, and now we can start dropping in some elements. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring in that composition that I did before, and I'm going to turn it 3D, and then that's going to shove it off somewhere. So it's kind of like pinged it off over here, and that's kind of made things a little bit kind of complicated, because what we got is we got this table, and then we've got this photo of Chris Evans kind of floating in space, and it makes it quite difficult to deal with because it's all a little bit random. And so what I'm going to try and do is I'm going to try and make this whole thing much easier to deal with. So looking through the camera, what I can do is I can go back to the camera tracker on here and find all of our points, and then what we can do is we can look here and we can say, well, is there anything that we could safely say is a track point on the wall, because the wall would be useful. So I'm going to grab that one. I think that one's on that one. The edge of that cushion seems to be against the wall, and this seems to be on the wall. So I'm going to create 3 nulls. So what we know is we know that those 3 nulls are on the wall. So when we look here and we have a pan around, we can see those. You can see those nulls in the background there. They're kind of just up here, and then we know that this is the table. So what we can do is we can kind of use a little bit of a trick, and we can create a new null object, and this one doesn't really matter what it's called. And we're going to take all of our objects, and we are going to red, and we're going to track those. We're going to parent those to the null, and this null we make 3D. So when we look at the left, we can see that the table and the walls are just in a crazy direction. But if we take this null and we spin it, we can zoom in and we can spin this like in this direction, and we can put the floor sort of more on the floor, if that sort of makes sense. And so we'll look here and we can see we've transformed this a little bit, and I'm just going to kind of get it as close as I can. And then we're going to look at the front, and we can see that that is on the floor. And then if we look at the left, well, now we've kind of got, we can see that the floor is like in a crazy sort of direction. And so what we're going to do now is we're going to take that null and we're going to create a new one. We'll create another null, and then we're going to parent null 1 to null 2, and null 2 will make 3D. And now what we can do is we can spin that around. So we're going to go to the rotate tool, and I just want to kind of get that so that you can see that now the wall is there, the floor is there, and if we move this along in X, so I'm just going to move that so that that is kind of in the middle, and that is there, and it goes to the front, and that's all good. Okay, so now I can delete those 2 nulls because they've sort of done their job. So now when I go, nothing's changed. Everything's still tracked. We still got those nulls, but when we look into the custom view, we can see that we've got a much more logical kind of 3D layout, so that when we bring in this photo and we make it 3D, you can see that it just drops it right on the top of the table, and that makes our life a hell of a lot easier. So what we can do now is we can start playing around with the scale, and we can kind of get this to be more accurately, and so we can kind of say, well, that's probably a good size for a photo. I mean, it's probably a bit big, but you know, what the hell, creative license, and we'll enable it to look like that. And then what we can do is we can go through the footage, and we can spin this around and kind of put them in sort of dynamic kind of positions to make it look cool. And I know that that is an incredibly lame way of looking at it. And then we'll duplicate that, and then we'll take this one and we'll just spin it around, and we'll move it, and we'll chuck it over here, and so that when we kind of go through the footage, we're going to kind of get this kind of stuff, which is kind of which is looking great. And then we duplicate this again, and which I didn't do, and duplicate, stick it here, and no. Stick that up there. So, you know, we're going through the footage and we got like these kind of photos spinning around, okay? And then I'm just gonna get that like that. And what we'll do is we'll repeat that process. So I'm going to grab these, all three, duplicate again, and I'm going to take all of them and just move those backwards. And then I'm going to use the rotate, and I'm going to spin them randomly. So now we've got like a bunch of them hanging in the air. And these ones, I think it would be kind of interesting if we made them, you know, put them somewhere else. So make sure you grab them properly. In fact, I'm just going to leave them because it's too complicated. And then move those up, because that one looked a bit close to the sofa. So now we've kind of got these random kind of photos. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate the whole lot again. And I am going to create a null. And all of these I'm going to move to the top. And this second group I am going to attach to a null object. So I think it was all of this lot. And I'll attach to a null object. And when I get that null object, which is I make 3D, when I move that, I'll be able to move all of those at the same time as well, so that I'm essentially lazy, and so I don't want to keep doing. So now what we've got is we've got kind of quite a lot of these photos kind of moving around. And then what you see is we do a zoom in here, which is interesting, because what we can do is we can, I'm just going to duplicate this one, so I think this one would look good closer to the camera. Rotate that. Because if we don't have stuff in the foreground, we don't really get the effect. It doesn't really look like, it won't really look like that these photos are floating in space. So we need to have, and I think that they're all a little bit big. So I'm just going to grab the whole lot, press scale, and bring them down to maybe 25. And that looks a little bit better. Okay, so now we've got all of these photos floating in space, which looks kind of interesting. And I'm going to get another one and duplicate it. And you have to use your best judgment to how you think these should be arranged in space. You know, however you feel will be the best composition. But then you can see at the end, this the camera does a move towards the wall, okay? And I'm going to lengthen all these. So if I go back into the photo composition is not long enough. So I'm going to go to composition settings, and I'm going to make this much longer. So let's make it, you know, 20 seconds. So when we go back to shot 1, you can see that all of these photos are now long enough so they don't get lost in the composition. But you can see that the camera does a zoom in, and that gives us an opportunity to do something. So what we can do is I'm going to drop another, I'm going to make a duplicate of the photo 1, and I'm going to, not there, I'm going to go here and duplicate that. And this one I am going to open up, and instead of having the photo of Chris Evans, what I'm going to do is I'm going to have the second shot that we did, which is a composition. So I'm going to drop that in here. This gets a bit head bendy. So you're going to have to kind of you're gonna have to kind of stay with me a little bit on this one, because this one gets a bit complicated. So we're going to scale this. I want to scale this shot in so we get as much of the footage in as possible, and you'll see why in a minute. So just get it so that it fills the frame. I mean, obviously the aspect ratio, the fact that it's a portrait means that it's never really going to fit in there. So, but you know, that's kind of the way it is. So now that this is fitted in here, and we'll leave that for a minute and we'll come back to that. So now what we want to do is we want to take photo 2, which is the one with our footage in, and we could, let's rename that, so footage photo. And so what we're going to do is we're going to drop this into the, and so we got this big, you know, we got this big kind of photo, and we'll turn that 3D, and you can see that it's kind of like, it's massive again, and we know that that photo needs to be 25 because that's the size we gave all the other ones. So when we go back to the camera, we see that this is what we want to do. Is when we get to the end of this zoom, we want to have this filling the frame. So we're going to bring this in, and we are going to raise it up and move it along. So yeah, we're kind of getting there, and I'm going to change the rotation so that this, you know, faces the camera. So make sure that these arrows are facing the camera, and we can see that that is not going to make it, so we're going to move that up a bit and move this along, and we want to kind of get this so that it exactly matches the camera. So we want to kind of spin this around so that you can see that the frame is now pretty much, so when we kind of go around we can see that this is, and then when this kind of gets to this point, we want to make sure that this is filling the frame, and so it's taking a little bit of judgment, and we want to bring this towards the camera, kind of like that, I think. Yeah, that's good enough. So now we kind of go through the footage, and then we got this kind of picture which is there, and then it sort of does that. And what we want to do is we want to kind of get to here-ish and make sure that this is getting a bit close. This will make sense in a minute, trust me. So that's looking good, and then move it a bit closer, and here, yeah, that's looking good. Okay, so now this is moving towards this photo, which is not a photo, it's actually some footage, and that's great. So I'm going to go back into the footage photo, and we need to do a little bit of matte work. So I'm just going to chop out that. We've still got Chris Evans lurking about. Get rid of him. And so now we've got this footage which is sort of locked there. So now this becomes the slightly complicated bit. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to the composition settings of this, and we're going to make this one, this is quite a long piece of footage, and we want to make this probably about 35 long. And you can see that this is increased this, because the piece of footage itself is quite long, and what we want to do is when we go back to shot 1 and we get to that point, so this point exactly, when we go back here, that's the stop point here of, that's exactly the same position in time as the other one. So what we're going to do is we're going to extend our frame all the way to the end, and we're going to take this and we're going to right click and go to time and do enable time remapping. And then we're going to put the first frame of this there. And what this enables us to do is here, we can extend the front of it. The front of it will be extended as a still photo, and then it will start moving. Okay? So now we go back to, and then when we get to here, it will stop at, you know, whatever kind of, you know, what is it, 1401 is going to stop. So I'm just going to trim that. I didn't know how long the shot was, and that's why I made it so long. So I'll trim that here, and then we'll trim comp to work area. So now we kind of got this kind of thing going on, and then there's a still image. So go back to shot 1, and we need to extend all of this as well. So go composition settings, and we're going to make this, you know, 20 seconds long. So now what's happening is we got this, it zooms into this photo, yeah, which gets here, and then what we want to do is exactly at this point we are going to take shot 1, which is here, shot 2, and we're going to drop this in here. So we've got this shot, which we know begins right at the beginning. And so what we're going to do is we're now going to try and match this to the footage underneath. So I'm going to turn off the opacity. So I'm going to bring it down a little bit. So, you know, like 50% or something like that. And so what we can see is we can sort of see like a ghost-like image of our footage, which is here, which is significantly smaller than the footage underneath. So I'm just going to make that bigger. I need to zoom out a little bit. I'm just going to make it bigger so that we can fit that onto the footage, and then we can kind of go like this. It needs to be moved down a bit, and we're gonna, it's a bit fiddly, but use the arrow keys to get it close. Make sure it's on full res so that you can definitely get a, and we can see it's pretty close. So what's gonna happen now is we're gonna go into this, and I'll do a little preview from here. Yeah. So what we're trying to do is then when we get to here, we are going to make this one so when we press play, because we've now put it back to full resolution, it's going to look like it's zoomed into that picture, and then that picture is started moving. And now what we want to do with this shot is we are going to animate the position and the scale, because at the moment it's scaled up, and we want to go all the way to the end, and then on the end one we're going to make this 100%, and then we want to make the position. Let's have a little review, and we're going to play through what we've got. So now it's going to just spool up the frames, and it's going to take a while because there's quite a lot of imagery going on here. We've got lots of photos. We can change all of those photos. You can see how easy it was to. Well, it wasn't that easy, but you can see that it's relatively straightforward to change a photo. But all we've done is we've changed a photo by replacing it with some footage, and so when we kind of get round to that photo now, which is coming up any second, we can see that that photo is in space, but it's not. All it is that footage captured as a still, and so we kind of come round to it, and you're like, oh right, okay, there's a different picture here. And so now what we're going to do is the camera is going to eventually zoom in, and then it's going to start that footage. We've already spooled that up, and we'll just wait for it for a few seconds. So we can see it kind of comes around, sees the photo, goes into it, and then we start a new piece of footage. So this is cool in the game. So we go back to shot 2. Shot 2, we've done the motion tracking on it. And what we've got is we've got loads of great points. We're going to create a solid and a camera. Pidding. We're going to get the solid. We are going to orientate that round. And we're going to go to effects. We're going to chuck the grid on it. And I'm just going to very, very quick test to see if it's good. And to be honest, that looks pretty solid already, and I think I'm going to stick with that. So we're going to look at the rest of the footage, and we're going to say, okay, well, is there any wall? You know, I can see some of these are. So I'm going to create 4 nulls. Take these, all of these objects. We're going to parent those to the null object. We're going to look in the camera, and we can see the view is like crazy. So we are going to go to the front, and what we're going to do is we're going to try and get that flat on the floor by taking our null, making it 3D, and we're going to start spinning some stuff around. So we're going to grab this one, and we're going to make that flat, or as flat as we can. It doesn't need to be absolutely flat, but it certainly helps if it is. And we're going to go through there, look at the transform and the orientation, and we can fine tune it a little bit more here. So that's looking pretty good. And we go to the top, and we see that is pretty crazy. And we look at the left, that's looking all right, but you can see that these wall ones are not lined up. So I'm going to create a new null, and I'm going to parent the previous null to that. Man, they really want to get hold of me, don't they? And I'm going to make this one 3D, and I'm going to rotate this one around so that the wall is flat, or as flat as we can get it. That's good enough for me. And then we look at the top, and we can see that the floor is, I don't know, the floor is kind of, you know, it doesn't have to be in the middle, but it just needs to be kind of vaguely in the center of our composition. And then we look at the custom view, and now we can see we've got something that makes a hell of a lot more sense. So we go back to our camera view, and nothing's changed because we haven't actually changed anything. All we've done is rotate the camera around, but the camera is attached to the nulls. We get rid of these nulls because we don't need them. And then we do the same thing. We go back here, we grab the photo, the lovely Chris Evans. It will orientate itself to the shot. We bring it down to where and then we go to scale. We make it 25 because we now know what the units of scale are, and then we can do, you know, all of our fiddling around and moving this and doing a quick. Let me zoom in a bit so it's not. And then we will duplicate that and stick this one here, and move this one up, and duplicate that on again. Stick this one up here, and this one down there. Maybe move it a bit more towards camera, and rotate it a bit, and you know, that kind of stuff. So now we've got like a similar kind of shot going on to what we had before, and duplicate that, and you know, knock yourself out in terms of this. You can change the photos, you can kind of do what you want really. So now we kind of got this as an image, but remember before what we did in the shot, because this is all going to be replicated in this one, because we did the same. Shot 2 has got the motion tracking and the solid, and shot 1 has got the motion tracking and the solid. So we're going to get rid of that solid now because we don't need it, and we don't need these track nulls. So now we've got this. This is great, and we're just going to do some finishing touches just to kind of make this kind of look a little bit nicer. So we're going to go into the camera, we're going to open it up, to camera options, we're going to turn depth of field on, and then we are going to increase the aperture. So you can see now that what it's doing is when we can go backwards and forwards, and we can focus on things that need to be focused on. So what we're going to do is we need that one to be in focus. That is because that's where we put all of our work into. So we need to make this one, when we get to it, we need that one to be absolutely like nailed on in focus. So it's not, okay? So we need to just make sure that that is the one that really is in focus. So I'm just going to change the focal distance if I can. Bring down the aperture as well, that's going to help. God, how far away am I from it? So I'm going to bring myself into that, and so my focal distance is obviously not right. Bring that down. Let's try it at like 50. No. I'm going to have to sort of do some. I totally screwed up the camera. So, I'm just going to have to. So we might even have to animate that as a element because it's kind of messing up the. So I'm going to just animate that like slowly, so that when we press play, because what we want is we want a bit of depth. So I'm going to do a preview of that to see what we end up with. And so when it kind of spools through, we will get through to the footage, and we will also get through to the final track shot of the computer as well, with the photos in it, because we're not going into the photo, we're going into a composition, if that kind of makes sense, which it probably doesn't. You're probably looking at all of this kind of going, what the heck? And it is a little bit confusing, but you kind of get used to it. So now we can see that it's coming into shot, and we can see that it's got those photos already there of the wonderful Chris Evans. So we zoom in, and it happens really quickly, and so we don't have to worry about motion matching it that well. And I'll let it spool a bit so that we can see the final result. And I know this is a long tutorial, but a lot of it is me just talking and waiting for previews. So hopefully this should take a little bit less time when you're actually doing it. And so now we can see the same thing, and the camera is spinning around. We've tracked it all, and also we've got to transform on that footage so that it's moving it back into position and it's not as zoomed in. So let's just give it a little bit of time. And then we can have a look at it. So there we go, it's spinning around, we've got the photos floating in midair. And we zoom into that, and then we've got more photos spinning in midair. And that's kind of how to do it. So what we're going to do is going to get to the end of this, and I'm just going to, I can't remember when we track them to about, let's stop it around here, and I'm going to trim that and trim the comp to the work area. And now shot 1 is done. We're going to drop that into a composition of its own. So this is shot 3, and we'll rename this final comp, because that's going to be everything all contained together. And then what we can do is we can take the shot and we can basically go to here and we can add any color corrections that we would like in order to make it look a little bit better. So we can just add some curves and make this warmer, and so I kind of think that we're going to make it a little bit warmer. So we'll bring some more red into it and go to the master one, and we're going to add a little bit of contrast just to kind of make it a little bit more dynamic. And then as we go through it, you can see it's a slightly different shot. And that's it. And I'll render this off and I'll post the final video to Google Classroom.